The rhythmic swoosh of worn windshield wipers marked time as Sarah Jenkins squinted through the rainy Atlanta evening. Her Toyota Corolla's dashboard clock read 7:42 p.m. She was making good time between her hospital cafeteria shift and evening nursing prerequisites. The familiar route home wound through streets lined with magnolia trees, their leaves glistening under streetlights that flickered to life in the growing dusk. Sarah's fingers drummed against the steering wheel as she mentally revised for tomorrow's anatomy quiz. The textbook propped open on her passenger seat displayed detailed diagrams of the cardiovascular system, its pages dog-eared from late-night study sessions. A child's drawing was tucked between the pages, her daughter Mia's artistic interpretation of Mommy becoming a nurse, complete with a stick figure wearing a cape. The first hint of trouble came as a flash of light reflected in her rearview mirror, not the steady beam of headlights, but something irregular. Sarah's heart skipped as she realized her taillight must be acting up again. The mechanic had warned her last month that the wiring was going, but the $200 repair estimate might as well have been $2,000, with Mia's growth spurt requiring new shoes and Josh needing his asthma medication refilled. Blue lights suddenly painted the rain-streaked windows, and Sarah's throat tightened. She checked her speedometer, 32 in a 35 zone. Her turn signal clicked steadily as she guided her car to the curb, hands positioned carefully at 10 and 2. The maintenance envelope in her glove compartment held her registration, insurance card, and license, organized just as her father had taught her years ago. Officer James Mitchell approached her window, rain dripping from his department-issued cap. His flashlight beam swept across her nursing textbooks before settling on her face. "License and registration, please, Mom." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she handed over the documents, her student ID visible among them. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Your right taillight is out completely, Miss Jenkins." And he paused, studying her registration. This expired 2 months ago. The words hit her like a physical blow. Registration renewal. It had been on her to-do list, buried under buy Josh's inhaler and pay electric bill. She'd meant to take care of it after her next paycheck. "I'm so sorry, officer. I knew about the taillight, but I've been saving up for the repair." Sarah's voice remained steady, professional, the same tone she used during her clinical rotations. "And the registration. I just started nursing school, and with 2 kids." Officer Mitchell's flashlight beam lowered, illuminating her scrubs, still bearing the hospital logo. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I understand times are tough, Ma'am, but I've got to write this up. It's a safety issue." Sarah nodded, her mind already calculating what this would cost, not just in fines, but in hours needed to make up the difference. One missed payment on anything could topple the careful balance she maintained between her children's needs, her education, and their basic survival. As Officer Mitchell returned to his patrol car to process the citations, Sarah pulled out her phone. The calculator app displayed her carefully tracked budget, numbers that never quite added up to enough. She added a new note, "Court date, must request payment plan." Outside, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the Atlanta sky, echoing the growing storm in Sarah's carefully constructed world. The courthouse marble felt cold and impersonal under Sarah's sensible nursing shoes. She'd arrived an hour early for her 9 a.m. hearing, wearing her one good blazer over a pressed white blouse, an outfit carefully steamed the night before, after the children had fallen asleep. Her nursing school acceptance letter crinkled softly in her purse with each nervous adjustment of her position on the wooden bench. Through the towering windows, morning sunlight cast long shadows across the corridor's polished floor. Sarah watched as other defendants arrived, some in suits, others in work clothes, all wearing the same expression of contained anxiety. A young mother struggled with a stroller nearby, her baby's cries echoing off the high ceilings. Sarah instinctively reached into her bag and pulled out a spare pacifier she always carried for emergencies, offering it with a gentle smile. The mother's grateful look formed a momentary bridge of understanding between them. Inside courtroom 3B, Judge William Harrison's reputation preceded him. Sarah had spent her lunch breaks researching him online. Known for his punctuality and no-nonsense approach, 25 years on the bench had earned him both respect and wariness from the local legal community. The retired teacher seated next to Sarah, who introduced herself as Eleanor Barnes, had been observing court proceedings for a civic research project. "He's fair," Eleanor whispered, "but he expects everyone to follow the rules to the letter." Sarah's hands tightened around her folder of documents. Pay stubs, bank statements, her children's medical bills, and the nursing school acceptance letter. She'd organized everything meticulously, hoping to demonstrate her commitment to responsibility despite her current circumstances. The morning crawled by as she watched case after case move through the system with mechanical efficiency. Docket number 247. Sarah Jenkins, the court clerk called out at precisely 10:17 a.m. Sarah's legs felt like lead as she approached the podium. Judge Harrison glanced up from his papers, his reading glasses perched at the edge of his nose. His chambers behind him were lined with leather-bound law books, their spines gleaming in the fluorescent light. "Ms. Jenkins, you're here regarding an expired registration and equipment violation," Judge Harrison stated, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "How do you plead?" "Guilty, Your Honor," Sarah replied, her voice clear despite her racing heart. "But I would like to explain my situation, if I may." The judge nodded almost imperceptibly, and Sarah unfolded her prepared statement. She explained about nursing school, her children's needs, and her plan to pay for both the repairs and registration renewal. Her words seemed to hang in the air of the hushed courtroom. "Ms. Jenkins," Judge Harrison interrupted, removing his glasses, "while I appreciate your candor, the law exists for everyone's safety. An expired registration and faulty equipment put others at risk." He paused, studying the documents before him. "The fine will be $500, plus court costs." The amount hit Sarah like a physical blow. Behind her, she heard Eleanor Barnes draw in a sharp breath. $500. That was her entire nursing school textbook budget for the upcoming semester. "Your Honor," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands, "would it be possible to arrange a payment plan?" Judge Harrison nodded to the clerk. "See Ms. Jenkins about payment arrangements." Next case. As Sarah turned to leave the podium, she caught Eleanor's eye. The retired teacher's face showed a mixture of concern and something else. Determination. Neither woman knew it then, but this moment would spark a chain of events that would reshape not just Sarah's future, but the lives of many others in their community. The soft glow of Sarah's laptop illuminated her small kitchen table at 11:45 p.m., casting shadows across spreadsheets and carefully organized bills. Her children's quiet breathing drifted from the bedroom down the hall, a gentle reminder of why she pushed herself so hard. The coffee in her mug had long since gone cold, forgotten during hours of calculating and recalculating every possible way to stretch her income. A new Excel document filled her screen, color-coded cells mapping out the next 3 months. Green for guaranteed income, her hospital cafeteria job, weekend cleaning shifts. Yellow for possibilities, the extra delivery routes she'd found on a job board, potential tutoring hours at the nursing school's study center. Red marked the non-negotiables: rent, utilities, groceries, her children's medications, and now, the court payments. Sarah rubbed her eyes, the numbers blurring together. Her anatomy textbook lay open beside her laptop, post-it notes sprouting from its pages like colorful petals. Tomorrow's quiz wouldn't wait, regardless of her financial juggling act. She'd already mastered the art of highlighting important passages while eating dinner, reviewing flashcards during her bus commute, and reciting medical terms under her breath while mopping hospital floors. A soft knock at her door startled her. Through the peephole, she saw Mrs. Chen, her elderly neighbor, holding a covered dish. Despite the late hour, Sarah opened the door. Mrs. Chen's unexpected visits had become a source of comfort over the past year. "You're still up," Mrs. Chen observed, setting the dish on Sarah's counter. Soup dumplings. Eat while you study. Her accent wrapped warmly around the words. She glanced at the papers scattered across the table, her eyes sharp despite her age. Your babies, they need mama strong, not tired. Sarah's throat tightened with gratitude. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I'm just trying to figure out how to make everything work. She gestured at her spreadsheets. Mrs. Chen picked up one of the job listings Sarah had printed. Early morning deliveries. When you sleep. She shook her head disapprovingly, then paused. My daughter, she works at shipping company. Maybe better job, better hours. I call her tomorrow. Before Sarah could respond, Mrs. Chen continued, and babies, they can stay with me when you work early. I make breakfast, walk them to school bus. Her tone brooked no argument. You study, become nurse. This important. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them back. I can't ask you to do that. Not asking. I'm telling. Mrs. Chen's face softened. My grandchildren grown now. House too quiet. Your babies bring noise. Life. Good trade. After Mrs. Chen left, Sarah returned to her spreadsheets with renewed energy. She added a note. Thank Mrs. Chen. Dumplings. Between the lines of calculations and payment schedules, she began to see not just numbers, but a network of possibilities. The early delivery routes would be tough, but with Mrs. Chen's help with the children, she could make it work. She opened a new tab on her laptop and began typing her resume, customizing it for the shipping company Mrs. Chen mentioned. The clock ticked past midnight as she worked, but her shoulders felt lighter. Tomorrow, she'd ace her anatomy quiz. She'd talk to the court clerk about adjusting her payment schedule. She'd make those early morning deliveries count. The numbers on her spreadsheet still didn't add up perfectly, but Sarah had discovered something more valuable than mathematical precision, the hidden strength that came from refusing to give up, and the unexpected angels who appeared just when hope seemed dimmest. Dawn painted Atlanta's skyline in soft pastels as Sarah guided her car through the quiet streets of the West End district. The early morning delivery route had become her ritual over the past 2 weeks. Newspapers, small packages, and today, a special order of baked goods to Sweet Dreams Bakery before their 6 a.m. opening. The aroma of fresh bread and warm sugar enveloped her as she pushed open the bakery's back door, carrying the box of specialty flours the owner had ordered. The kitchen was already alive with activity, mixing bowls whirring and ovens humming their warm symphony. You're right on time, a deep voice called out. Marcus Thompson emerged from behind a rack of cooling croissants, his dark skin dusted with flour, a warm smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. 3rd delivery this week. You're becoming a regular. Sarah carefully set down the box. The route works with my schedule, she replied, pulling out her delivery slip. Though I have to admit, the smell in here almost makes up for the 4 a.m. alarm. Marcus chuckled, signing the paper with a flourish. Then he paused, studying her face. You look tired. Come on, take 5 minutes. Best cinnamon rolls in Atlanta are just coming out of the oven. Sarah started to decline. She had 2 more deliveries, and then a shift at the hospital, but her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. Marcus was already pulling out a chair at the small break table, placing a warm roll and a cup of coffee in front of her. I used to do delivery routes too, he said, sitting down across from her with his own coffee. That was before I bought this place. Worked 3 jobs, saved every penny. He gestured around the bustling kitchen. Now look at us, serving half the restaurants in Atlanta. Sarah took a bite of the cinnamon roll, closing her eyes briefly at the perfect balance of spice and sweetness. How did you make the jump from deliveries to this? Someone believed in me, Marcus replied simply. Old Mr. Rodriguez owned this place before me. Saw me making deliveries every morning, always on time, always professional. Started teaching me the business, bit by bit. He studied Sarah over his coffee cup. Sometimes all it takes is one person to see your potential. Sarah found herself sharing her story. Nursing school, the fine, Her children, the endless calculations to make everything work. Marcus listened intently, occasionally nodding. "You know," he said finally, "I could use someone reliable for weekend inventory and register work. Flexible hours, decent pay, and," he smiled, "all the day-old pastries you can take home to your kids." Sarah's heart skipped. "Are you serious? 6 hours each weekend, you choose the times around your other commitments. Plus," he added, his eyes twinkling, "healthcare workers get free coffee for life here. Consider it an investment in my future medical care." The kitchen clock showed 5:45 a.m. She needed to move on to her next delivery. As she stood, Marcus handed her a bag of fresh pastries. "For your kids, and Sarah. We all need help sometimes. The trick is learning to accept it when it comes." Driving to her next stop, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. The morning sun caught her rearview mirror, and for a moment she saw herself as Marcus had, not just a woman struggling with bills and fines, but someone with potential, someone worth investing in. The paper bag of pastries sat warm on her passenger seat, a reminder that sometimes angels wore flour-dusted aprons and offered second chances with coffee on the side. Lisa Martinez drummed her fingers on her desk at the Atlanta Daily Chronicle, scanning through her emails when one subject line caught her eye. A story about hope. It had come from Jenny Chen, a local college student whose grandmother couldn't stop talking about her neighbor, a nursing student named Sarah Jenkins. The newsroom hummed around her, but Lisa found herself drawn into the email's details. A single mother, working multiple jobs while pursuing nursing school, hit with a heavy fine that threatened to derail everything. But it wasn't the hardship that made Lisa lean forward. It was how this woman had turned her struggle into something remarkable. "You should see her, Ms. Martinez," Jenny had written. "My grandmother says she studies anatomy while eating breakfast with her kids, teaching them medical terms like a game. The other day, I heard her 5-year-old daughter telling someone she wants to be a cardiovascular specialist when she grows up." Lisa reached for her phone, remembering her own mother's struggles raising 3 kids alone. Within an hour, she was sitting in Mrs. Chen's small living room, notebook open, as Sarah's children played quietly in the corner. "She never complains," Mrs. Chen said, pouring green tea. Other tenants, they see her leaving at dawn for deliveries, coming home late from hospital work. Now they take turns watching her children, sharing meals. The elderly woman's eyes sparkled. Sarah teaches them things too. How to check blood pressure, what medicines not to mix. Simple things, but important. Later that afternoon, Lisa sat in Sweet Dreams Bakery, watching Sarah balance a tray of pastries while explaining different types of diabetes to a regular customer. Marcus Thompson, the owner, beamed like a proud brother. "She's changed this place," he told Lisa. "Customers come in just to ask her health questions. Last week, she noticed one of our regulars seemed off. Turned out his blood sugar was dangerously low. She knew exactly what to do." Lisa's article took shape, not as a story of hardship, but as a portrait of resilience and community. She wrote about the impromptu health education sessions that happened over coffee and pastries, about Mrs. Chen's grandchildren learning anatomy alongside Sarah's kids, about the small network of neighbors who had become an extended family. The morning the article appeared, more than fine. How one woman's struggle united a community. The Chronicle's website crashed from local traffic. Sarah's story resonated beyond the financial burden. It spoke to everyone who'd ever faced seemingly insurmountable odds. By afternoon, the paper's inbox was flooded. A local nursing uniform company offered Sarah a scholarship. 3 medical practices reached out about future positions, but it was the smaller responses that touched Lisa most. Elderly residents offering to babysit, students asking about study groups, people sharing their own stories of persistence. "I never wanted attention," Sarah told Lisa over coffee that evening, her eyes bright with unhed tears. "I was just trying to survive." "Sometimes survival inspires others," Lisa replied, watching as another customer waved to Sarah. "You've shown people that asking for help isn't weakness. It's how we build stronger communities." As if to prove her point, a young woman approached their table tentatively. "I read about you," she said to Sarah. "I'm a single mom too, thinking about nursing school but scared to try." She twisted her hands nervously. Sarah's face softened with understanding. She pulled out a chair. "Sit down," she said warmly. "Let me tell you what I've learned about being scared and doing it anyway." Lisa quietly closed her notebook. Some stories wrote themselves, and this one was far from over. Judge William Harrison's morning ritual remained unchanged for 25 years. Coffee at his antique desk, local newspaper spread before him, fountain pen ready for his daily crossword. But today, something caught his eye before he could reach for one across. Sarah Jenkins' photo smiled up at him from the Chronicle's feature section. He remembered her case, one of hundreds he'd heard, yet suddenly distinct in his memory. The nursing student with the carefully organized folder, her quiet dignity in the face of the fine he'd imposed. Now, reading Lisa Martinez's article, he saw what he'd missed that day, the deeper story behind another case number. The courtroom felt different that morning. As he adjusted his robes before entering, Harrison found himself thinking about Sarah's words from the article. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't facing your struggles, but letting others see them. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and Harrison took his seat, but his usual stern expression had softened imperceptibly. The first case involved a young mechanic caught driving with an expired license. Typically, Harrison would have simply applied the standard fine. But today he asked, "Tell me about your work, Mr. Rodriguez." The surprised man explained how he was apprenticing at his uncle's garage, learning hybrid car technology, dreaming of opening his own shop someday. Harrison found himself remembering another young man with dreams, himself, before law school, when a mentor's guidance had changed his path. During the morning break, Judge Margaret Chen, his longtime colleague, found him staring out his chamber window. "Interesting approach today, Bill," she observed, settling into a leather chair. "Reminded me of how Judge Thompson used to run his courtroom." Harrison turned, curious. "James Thompson, before my time." He believed every case deserved a story, not just a sentence. She smiled. "Used to drive the clerks crazy, running behind schedule because he asked too many questions. But his recidivism rates were the lowest in the state." That afternoon, Harrison did something unprecedented. He left the courthouse during lunch and walked to Sweet Dreams Bakery, where Sarah worked weekends. He didn't announce himself, just ordered coffee and watched. Sarah moved efficiently behind the counter, greeting customers by name, offering medical advice between orders. A young mother asked about her baby's fever. An elderly man showed her his new blood pressure monitor. Each interaction was brief but meaningful, turning a simple bakery into something more. When she finally approached his table, recognition flickered in her eyes, but no resentment showed on her face. "Good afternoon, Your Honor. Welcome to Sweet Dreams." "Ms. Jenkins," he nodded, then hesitated. "I read about your journey. It gave me perspective." Sarah's smile was genuine. "Every day teaches us something new, doesn't it?" Back in his chambers, Harrison made a call to the court administrator. "I want to start a pilot program," he said. "Community service options, payment plans based on ability to pay, partnerships with local businesses for job training." "That's quite a change, Your Honor," the administrator replied carefully. Harrison thought of Sarah, of Mr. Rodriguez, of all the stories he'd missed over the years. Maybe it's time for change. That evening, as he prepared to leave, he noticed a young lawyer struggling with case files in the corridor. Usually, he would have walked past, maintaining professional distance. Instead, he stopped. "Need a hand?" he offered, reaching for a falling folder. "And while we organize these, tell me about what brought you to law." Sometimes, he realized, the most important judgments weren't made from behind the bench, but in these small moments of human connection. The community center's meeting room buzzed with energy on a warm Saturday morning. What had started as Sarah's story had grown into something larger, a movement that Marcus Thompson liked to call the Neighborhood Network. Today marked their first official gathering. Marcus stood at the front of the room, his bakery apron replaced by a neat blazer. When I first met Sarah Jenkins making deliveries at dawn, I saw myself years ago. Someone working hard, needing just one break. He gestured to the diverse crowd. Now look around. We're all here because we recognized ourselves in her story. The room held an unusual mix: small business owners, healthcare workers, teachers, and families. Mrs. Chen sat in the front row, beaming proudly as her granddaughter Jenny translated the proceedings into Mandarin for several elderly residents. Eleanor Barnes, the retired teacher from the courthouse, had brought fellow educators eager to start after-school tutoring programs. Sarah, standing quietly near the back, marveled at how her personal struggle had transformed into this tapestry of community support. Her children played in the corner with other kids, supervised by a rotation of volunteer caregivers, part of the new neighborhood child care co-op. Today, we're launching 3 initiatives, Marcus announced. First, the Emergency Car Repair Fund. He nodded to a group of local mechanics. These folks have agreed to provide discounted services, while local businesses contribute to a fund for families in need. Lisa Martinez, typing notes for a follow-up article, watched Sarah's eyes shine with happy tears. The fund had already helped 2 single parents avoid the same spiral of fines and fees that had nearly derailed Sarah's dreams. Second, Marcus continued, our skills exchange program. He gestured to Mrs. Chen, who stood proudly. We've discovered our community holds incredible knowledge. Seniors teaching cooking and language skills, professionals offering career mentoring, students providing technology lessons. Everyone has something to teach, something to learn. The program had grown from Sarah's impromptu health education sessions at the bakery. Now, informal classes sprouted across the neighborhood, everything from resume writing to basic healthcare to financial literacy. Finally, Marcus smiled, our legal navigation partnership. Eleanor Barnes stepped forward, accompanied by 3 volunteer paralegals. Because everyone deserves to understand their rights and responsibilities. The partnership had been Judge Harrison's suggestion, though he'd insisted on remaining anonymously involved. The program helped residents understand court procedures, rights, and obligations before small issues became large problems. As the meeting continued, Sarah slipped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The morning sun warmed her face as she thought about how much had changed. Her nursing school textbooks still filled her kitchen table, but now they shared space with community planning documents and thank you notes from people she'd helped. Lisa followed her out, notebook in hand. Penny for your thoughts. Sarah smiled. I was just thinking about that fine. How something that felt like an ending became a beginning instead. Your story changed people, Sarah. It showed them they weren't alone. Inside, the meeting had evolved into small working groups. The local diner owner discussed meal plans with the child care co-op. Medical students from Sarah's nursing program offered to start health screening events. Every conversation sparked new connections, new possibilities. As Sarah rejoined the group, a young mother approached her hesitantly. I got a traffic fine last week, she whispered. I was scared to tell anyone, but then I remembered your story. Sarah gently led her toward Eleanor's legal aid table. Let's figure it out together, she said. That's what community means. Through the windows, Atlanta's skyline stretched toward the horizon, a reminder that every city was really just a collection of neighborhoods, every neighborhood a web of individual stories, and every story a chance to build something larger than ourselves. The Atlanta Memorial Hospital auditorium buzzed with excitement on graduation day. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching the white edges of nursing caps and the proud tears of family members. Sarah Jenkins stood backstage, adjusting her graduation pin, her heart racing with a different kind of nervousness than she'd felt 2 years ago in that courthouse. Mom, you're fidgeting again, Maya said, reaching up to straighten Sarah's cap. At 12 now, she'd grown into a passionate advocate for her mother's dreams, keeping a countdown calendar to graduation day. Josh, now 10, clutched a handmade card decorated with carefully drawn stethoscopes. Mrs. Chen appeared, elegant in her best silk dress, dabbing her eyes. "Like my own daughter graduating," she said, pulling Sarah into a tight embrace. Behind her, Marcus Thompson balanced a large box of celebration pastries, wearing the biggest grin Sarah had ever seen. "The bakery's closed today," he announced proudly. "Entire staff insisted on coming. Your family, after all." As Sarah peeked through the curtain, she saw familiar faces filling the rows. Eleanor Barnes sat with her tutoring group, some of whom were now pursuing their own healthcare careers. Lisa Martinez had her reporter's notebook ready, though today she was here as a friend. Even Jenny Chen had taken a break from her medical school applications to attend. But it was the figure sitting quietly in the back that caught Sarah's eye. Judge William Harrison, looking different somehow in casual clothes rather than his judicial robes. He'd become a regular volunteer at the hospital's legal aid clinic, though few knew he was the one who'd helped establish it. The ceremony began, and as Sarah waited for her name, she remembered another morning 2 years ago. She'd been standing in his courtroom, that heavy fine seeming like the end of her dreams. Now she understood it had been just the beginning. "Sarah Jenkins," the dean called. As she walked across the stage, the cheers erupted, not just from her designated seats, but throughout the auditorium. The neighborhood network had shown up in force. Later, at the reception, Judge Harrison approached her. "Nurse Jenkins," he said warmly, extending his hand. "I believe this belongs to you." He handed her an envelope. Inside was her original court document, stamped "Paid in Faveur," along with a letter appointing her to the hospital's Community Outreach Committee. "We need voices like yours," he said quietly, "to remind us what justice really means." Sarah looked around the room, at her children proudly wearing their "My Mom's a Nurse" t-shirts, at Mrs. Chen teaching her famous breathing exercises to an anxious new graduate, at Marcus distributing celebratory cupcakes decorated with tiny nursing caps. The scene represented everything she'd learned. That community was stronger than circumstance, that help could come from unexpected places, and that sometimes the hardest challenges led to the most beautiful transformations. "You know," Lisa said, joining them with her ever-present notebook, "I've written a lot of stories, but yours keeps teaching me new endings." Sarah smiled, touching her graduation pin. "Not endings," she corrected gently. "New beginnings." As if to prove her point, a young nursing student approached nervously. "Miss Jenkins, I read about your story when I was struggling with my prerequisites. You're the reason I didn't quit." Sarah reached for the girl's hand, remembering her own moments of doubt, the strength she'd found in community, the power of perseverance. "Tell me about your journey," she said warmly. Because that's what life was, she'd learned, not a series of finds or failures or triumphs, but a continuous circle of giving and receiving, of falling and rising, of strangers becoming family, and of every ending opening the door to something new.